Sarah Bennett's hands shook as she refilled the water glass at table 7. Not from nervousness, from rage she'd swallowed for 5 years, rage that had fermented inside her like wine aging in darkness, growing more potent with every humiliation. Victor Carrington stood at the head of Carrington's private dining room like a king addressing his court, silver hair gleaming under crystal chandeliers that cost more than Sarah's car, gripping a bottle that cost more than she made in 6 months. 60 of Seattle's wealthiest faces watched him like he was performing magic, like he was revealing secrets of the universe instead of just holding expensive wine. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Elliott Bay behind him, the water dark and glittering with reflected city lights. But all eyes stayed locked on the wine, on Victor, on the performance of inherited expertise. "No one in this room," Victor announced, his voice dripping with a kind of certainty that only comes from never being challenged, never being wrong, never facing consequences, could tell this 1982 Chateau Petrus from a decent Napa Cabernet without seeing the label. Sarah's hand faltered, just for a heartbeat, a micro-expression that screamed disagreement louder than words ever could. Victor's eyes snapped to her like a predator spotting movement in tall grass. His smile sharpened. This was the moment he lived for, the moment he could remind someone of their place in the hierarchy he'd inherited. Something to say, "Sweetheart"? The condescension in that word could have curdled milk. The room went silent. Conversation died mid-sentence. Crystal glasses stopped halfway to lips. 60 wealthy faces turned toward the invisible waitress in the corner like spotlights swiveling to illuminate prey. Sarah's cheeks burned crimson. Her heart slammed against her ribs, so hard she wondered if they could hear it. This thundering proof of her humanity that they'd spent 5 years ignoring. Victor's fingers shot out toward her, diamond cufflinks catching candlelight and throwing sparkles across the walls, slicing through the air like a blade meant to cut her down to size. "You think you know wine? How adorable." Phones rose like a field of black mirrors. Someone was already recording. This was entertainment to them. Watching the help get humiliated. Watching someone who served them get reminded that serving was all they'd ever be worthy of doing. Then Victor's smirk widened, sensing blood in the water the way sharks do. He was going to make this memorable. He was going to make this hurt. "Tell you what, I'll make this interesting." His voice boomed across the room, carrying to every corner, making sure everyone would witness what came next. "Pick the real wine from 3 glasses blindfolded, and I'll sign this entire restaurant over to you. $3 million. Deed, inventory, wine cellar, everything." The room exploded with laughter. Sharp, cruel laughter that echoed off marble floors and bounced between walls like shrapnel. The kind of laughter that feels good because it's happening to someone else, because it confirms that you're on the right side of the hierarchy. "That's cruel, Victor," someone called out, but they were still laughing. "It's educational," Victor shot back, his smirk turning vicious, predatory. Sarah's jaw clenched. Something ancient and buried stirred behind her eyes. Something she'd killed 5 years ago to survive. Something she'd buried so deep she'd almost forgotten it existed. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, but in the silence it carried like thunder. "And when I do it correctly?" "When? Not if." Victor's laugh was a knife dragged slowly across glass. "Then I guess you'll be my boss. But when you fail, and you'll fail spectacularly, you resign immediately and admit publicly that you were presumptuous enough to think a waitress belonged in a conversation about fine wine." The laughter grew darker. These people lived for this, watching someone beneath them squirm, watching the hierarchy reinforce itself, watching the world confirm that they deserved their wealth and others deserved their poverty. Sarah's heart hammered so hard she thought her chest might split open. This wasn't a challenge. This was a public execution. But Victor Carrington didn't know something crucial. Sarah Bennett wasn't always a waitress. And tonight, his entire world was about to shatter. To understand what happened that night, to understand why it mattered so much, You need to see the chasm between their worlds. The distance wasn't measured in miles. It was measured in possibilities and choices, in the freedom to become who you were meant to be. Victor Carrington's empire sat in the heart of Seattle's Pioneer Square. Carrington's, a Michelin three-star establishment worth $3.2 million. The building itself was a converted 1920s warehouse, all exposed brick and soaring ceilings, the kind of space that whispered old money and new taste. His wine cellar descended 2 stories underground, a temperature-controlled cathedral housing 4,000 bottles, some worth $20,000 each. $20,000 for fermented grapes and glass. More money in that cellar than most Seattle families would see in a lifetime of working. He inherited it from his father, who inherited it from his father. 3 generations of wealth that required no effort, only birthright. No struggle, no sacrifice, no impossible choices between dreams and survival. Just the uninterrupted privilege of being born on the right side of the divide. His sommelier certification hung in his mahogany office like a war trophy, surrounded by photos with celebrity chefs whose names opened doors and James Beard Awards that sparkled under recessed lighting. The wall was a shrine to inherited opportunity, each frame a reminder that success favors those who start at the top. Every night, $800 dinners were served to tech executives closing 7-figure deals over wine that cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. Old money celebrated golden anniversaries with bottles older than Sarah herself. Casual consumption of history and luxury that meant nothing to them, because they'd never known anything different. Victor's Mercedes S-Class sat in the reserved spot out front, license plate reading CRNGTN, because even his car had to announce his ownership. His Belltown penthouse offered unobstructed views of the Space Needle, floor-to-ceiling windows that framed Seattle like a painting he owned. This was a man who'd never known struggle, never faced a choice between dreams and survival, never understood that poverty doesn't make you stupid. It just makes you invisible. It makes you furniture in the lives of people who matter. But Sarah Bennett? Her world existed in a different dimension entirely. Cut to Rainier Valley, where Seattle's wealth doesn't flow. A studio apartment, 412 square feet, that swallowed $1,200 of her monthly income. 412 square feet to contain an entire life, to hold all the dreams she'd folded up and stored away. Medical bills covered the second-hand coffee table like fallen leaves after autumn storms. Dialysis treatments, specialist consultations, prescription costs, each one stamped in aggressive red ink. Overdue, overdue, overdue. Silent accusations she faced every morning, every evening, every moment she opened her eyes. Her alarm screamed at 4:45 a.m., a sound that had become the soundtrack of survival. Sarah would drag herself from a mattress on the floor, no bed frame, that luxury abandoned years ago. Make instant coffee in a chipped mug that said "World's Best Daughter," a Mother's Day gift from before everything fell apart. She'd pull on scrubs worn tissue-thin from endless washing, fabric so thin you could almost see through it in certain light. Her father's medications lined the kitchen counter like toy soldiers preparing for battle they couldn't win. Metoprolol, furosemide, calcitriol, names she'd memorized, pills that kept him alive but couldn't cure him, that bought time but couldn't buy health. On the wall hung a single-framed photo. Sarah in Culinary Institute graduation robes, her father healthy and beaming beside her, both their smiles so bright it hurt to look at now. That was 5 years ago, a different lifetime, a different Sarah, a Sarah who believed hard work and talent would be enough. But if you think her story is just about loss, stay with me, because what she buried is about to resurface in the most spectacular way. Hidden under her bed, pushed against the wall where she wouldn't see it daily and be reminded of everything she'd lost, sat a dog-eared copy of the Wine Bible. Pages marked with notes in her precise handwriting, annotations she'd made when she thought she had a future. annotations about terroir, vintage variation, blind tasting technique. The language of a world she'd been forced to abandon. A leather journal filled with tasting notes from 5 years ago, entries ending abruptly on a date circled in black. The day her mother died. The day everything changed. The day her future became her past. These were artifacts of a buried life. A dream she'd folded up and stored away because survival demanded it, because you can't pursue excellence when you're drowning. Because sometimes love means killing your own dreams so someone else can live. Sarah's hands told the whole story. Hands that scrubbed toilets at 5 a.m. Fingers raw from industrial cleaning chemicals that stripped away skin cells and dignity in equal measure. But these same hands once held burgundy glasses with professional precision, swirling wine with the confidence of someone who understood it at a molecular level, who could read a vintage, like others, read books. How does a mind hold both realities, cleaning chemicals and wine knowledge, coexisting in the same brain? The expertise of a master sommelier trapped inside the body of an invisible service worker. Genius forced into hiding by the brutal mathematics of American healthcare and working-class survival. Victor saw a uniform, a role, a person beneath him, furniture that refilled water glasses and cleared plates and existed only to serve. He never saw the prodigy forced into hiding, the genius shaped by sacrifice rather than privilege, the woman who knew more about wine than he ever would, who had earned what he'd inherited, but had to pretend ignorance just to keep her father alive. Two people, two worlds, one collision course. And tonight, in front of 60 witnesses and thousands watching online, Victor Carrington would learn the most expensive lesson of his privileged life. The person you underestimate might be the master you never recognized. 5 years ago, Sarah Bennett's life looked completely different. So different it felt like remembering someone else's story, someone else's future that got stolen in the night. She was a rising star at the Culinary Institute of America, specializing in wine studies, a program so competitive that only 30 students worldwide were admitted each year. 30 students out of thousands of applicants. The acceptance rate made Harvard look easy. Sarah wasn't just admitted, she dominated. Her professors called her pal once a generation, the kind of gift that comes along so rarely they could count previous examples on one hand. She scored in the 99th percentile on blind tastings, identifying not just regions and varietals, but specific vineyards, vintage years, even winemaking techniques from a single sip. She could taste whether grapes were harvested in morning or afternoon, whether fermentation happened in steel or oak, whether the winemaker used cultured or wild yeast. It wasn't just knowledge, it was artistry. A gift that couldn't be taught, only refined. Like perfect pitch in musicians or color memory in painters, Sarah possessed something rare and irreplaceable. Top restaurants in New York, San Francisco, and Seattle competed for her internship. They sent recruiters, made offers, promised futures built on her talent. Master sommeliers, legends in the industry who'd spent decades perfecting their craft, took her under their wing, recognizing something that comes once in a career of teaching. She was on track to become the youngest master sommelier in Pacific Northwest history. At 23, her future sparkled like champagne and crystal, all bubbles and light and possibility. Then she met David. He was a line cook at a Portland vineyard where she did her externship. Tattooed arms that told stories in ink, worn chef's clogs that had seen 1,000 services, dreams bigger than his paycheck, but no less real for being underfunded. They fell in love over staff meals and cheap wine, the kind of romance that happens in kitchens and restaurants when two people understand the grind, the passion, the beautiful brutality of hospitality work. They drew restaurant layouts on napkins during breaks, planning a future where they'd open a small bistro together. He'd cook. She'd curate the wine program. They'd build something beautiful from nothing, the way their parents and grandparents had. It felt inevitable, like watching a perfect vintage develop, like destiny was real and they'd found theirs. Sarah thought she'd found her person, someone who understood the hospitality grind, who knew what it meant to work doubles and holidays and miss family gatherings because the restaurant needed you, someone who dreamed alongside her, who saw the same future she did. She was wrong. The phone call came at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday in October. Sarah would remember forever that it was raining, that she'd fallen asleep studying for her advanced sommelier exam, that David was snoring softly beside her in their tiny Portland apartment. Her mother, massive stroke, catastrophic, the kind where doctors use words like unlikely and prepare yourself, and there's nothing we can do. The kind where time stops and the world tilts sideways and nothing will ever be the same again. Sarah caught the first flight home, David holding her hand in the airport, promising everything would be okay even though they both knew it wouldn't. But by the time she arrived, her mother's brain activity had flatlined. Life support, machines breathing for a body that would never wake up. Impossible decisions that number 23-year-old should have to make. Sarah was 23 years old, signing papers to let her mother die, choosing the time and method of death for the woman who gave her life. The cruelty of it, that this was called mercy, that this was what love looked like in the end. 48 hours later, at the funeral, her father collapsed. Kidney failure, advanced, stage 4. His body had been failing for months, but he'd hidden it, not wanting to burden Sarah during her crucial final year at the Institute, not wanting to steal her future the way his own body was stealing his. Now his kidneys were shutting down completely. Immediate dialysis required. Eventual transplant necessary for survival. The doctors used words like critical and urgent and expensive. The medical bills came like an avalanche. First, her mother's final hospitalization, $87,000 after insurance. Then her father's emergency treatment, $52,000. Then the ongoing dialysis, $4,500 per week. Then the transplant surgery estimate, $400,000, $400,000. Her father's insurance had lapsed due to a paperwork error during her mother's hospitalization. A cruel bureaucratic nightmare that no amount of appeals could fix. A single unchecked box on a form filed during grief. And suddenly everything was gone. Coverage, security, future. Sarah sat in a hospital waiting room at 3 a.m., surrounded by beeping machines and antiseptic smell and fluorescent lights that made everyone look dead. She faced an impossible choice, the kind that breaks people into before and after versions of themselves. Continue her dream and watch her father die, or abandon everything and save him. There was no third option, no compromise, no middle ground, just binary cruelty. David stood in their Portland apartment doorway 3 weeks later, duffel bag packed. Sarah would remember forever what he was wearing. That stupid Radiohead t-shirt she'd always hated, jeans with a hole in the knee, the Vans sneakers she'd bought him for his birthday. "I can't watch you destroy yourself for this," he said, voice breaking in a way that might have been genuine. "Your dad's sick. Your career is over. I can't, I'm sorry, Sarah. I just can't. Just can't." As if love were optional, as if commitment had conditions, as if for better or worse, only applied when you made it official. The door closed. Sarah was 23 years old, alone in an apartment that cost $1,400 she couldn't afford, with a dying father and dreams turning to ash in her hands. She withdrew from the Culinary Institute, an email to her advisor, a phone call to financial aid, a checkbox on a form that said family emergency. As if those 2 words could contain the magnitude of everything she was losing. She set aside her master sommelier certification, 80% complete, just 2 more exams away, now meaningless. Years of study, thousands of dollars, countless hours, all of it abandoned because survival doesn't care about your dreams. She took the first job that offered health insurance and steady paychecks. Waitress at Carrington's. She told herself it was temporary, just until her father stabilized, just until the medical bills became manageable, just until she could breathe again. 5 years later, she was still there. If you're wondering whether Sarah's story has a turning point, you're about to witness it. Subscribe so you don't miss how her buried expertise becomes her weapon. 3 times weekly, Sarah sat beside her father in the dialysis center after her double shift. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. A ritual carved from necessity. For hours per session. Machines filtered his blood because his kidneys couldn't. Removing toxins his body should have removed, but no longer could. The mechanical whir and beep had become the soundtrack to their conversations. The same conversations week after week, worn smooth like riverstones. How was work? Fine. How are you feeling? Tired. Did you eat? Yes. Lies and truth mixed together, because sometimes love meant pretending things were better than they were. How was work, sweetheart, he asked, skin gray like old paper. Eyes tired but warm. Fine, Dad. Same as always. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, metallic, like blood. He squeezed her hand with what little strength remained. You're too smart to be serving wine, Sarah. You should be teaching about it. Her throat tightened. Tears threatened but didn't fall. She'd learned years ago how to cry without showing it, how to break apart silently so no one saw the pieces. Someone's got to pay the bills. I know, baby. I know. His voice cracked. I'm sorry you had to give up everything for me. Don't, Sarah whispered fiercely. Don't apologize for being alive. Don't you dare. The transplant list wait time stretched ahead like an endless highway. 3 to 5 years. 3 to 5 years of watching him deteriorate, of machines doing the work his body should have done, of gray skin and exhaustion and slow death. Private transplant surgery cost $400,000 they didn't have and never would unless something changed. Medical bills stacked on her coffee table like silent accusations, each one a reminder of the dream she'd traded for his survival. Each one proof that in America, you chose between family and future. You chose between love and ambition. You chose, and then you lived with the choosing. Sarah carried 2 identities now. The invisible waitress Victor Carrington saw, forgettable, subservient, beneath notice, existing only to serve. And the master-level sommelier buried beneath 5 years of survival. Her expertise locked away like a prisoner, her gift gathering dust, her identity erased. But tonight, in front of 60 witnesses and thousands watching online, those 2 identities were about to collide, and Victor Carrington's entire world was about to shatter against the truth he'd never seen coming. Victor Carrington straightened his designer suit jacket, Armani custom-tailored, worth more than Sarah's car, composing himself after Sarah's impossibly precise answer about Bordeaux terroir. His hand shook slightly as he set down the Petrus, a tremor he hoped no one noticed. But 60 pairs of eyes noticed everything. They were predators, sensing weakness, sensing that the performance might have cracks. Fine, he announced, voice sharp enough to cut glass, sharp enough to draw blood. Let's establish the parameters of this little experiment. The word dripped with condescension. Experiment. As if Sarah were a lab rat. As if her expertise were hypothesis rather than proven fact. He gestured to his sommelier Michaelchin, a certified master sommelier who'd been watching with increasing discomfort, who wheeled out a cart bearing 3 identical Riedel stems. Crystals so fine it seemed to shimmer in the candlelight. Each glass hand-blown in Austria. Each one worth $150. Victor's need for theatrical presentation, even in humiliation, even when setting a trap. 3 glasses, Victor declared, recovering his showman confidence, his voice rising to fill the room. One contains this 1982 Chateau Petrus, a $15,000 bottle, arguably one of the finest Bordeaux ever produced. A wine that's been aging for 43 years, developing complexity that most people will never experience in their entire lives. Complexity that takes expertise to recognize, years of study to appreciate. He paused for effect, making sure every phone camera captured this moment, making sure the live stream caught his performance. This was theater. This was cruelty dressed as entertainment. The second glass contains an $800 mid-tier Bordeaux I've selected specifically to confuse, Victor continued. A very good wine, don't misunderstand, but lacking that transcendent quality that separates legends from merely excellent bottles. It's exactly the kind of wine that ambitious amateurs might mistake for greatness. The kind that tricks people who think they know more than they do. Someone in the crowd laughed, nervously. This was entertainment, yes, but the cruelty underneath made them uncomfortable. They could sense they were watching something that would be remembered, recorded, replayed. Something that might not end the way Victor expected. The third, Victor said, his smirk returning like a familiar mask, like armor he'd worn his entire privileged life, contains a $200 supermarket wine. A Napa Cabernet that drinks pleasantly enough, but has no business being compared to serious Bordeaux. I've aerated it for an hour to give it every possible advantage. I'm being generous here. I'm giving her every chance. He let that sink in. The setup seemed fair on the surface, seemed like an honest test. But the trap was obvious to anyone who understood wine. 3 different price points, 3 different profiles, all designed to test someone who'd supposedly been serving, not studying, for 5 years. All designed to humiliate. You'll be blindfolded, Victor announced, his voice rising with theatrical authority that echoed off the high ceilings. You'll taste all 3. You'll identify which is the Petrus. Not just guess. Identify with certainty, with the kind of precision that requires years of formal education. If you succeed, and I mean perfect identification, Carrington's is yours. Deed, liquor license, wine cellar, staff contracts, the building itself, everything. $3.2 million in assets transferred to your name. The room gasped collectively. This wasn't a joke anymore. This wasn't just entertainment. This was a legal contract forming in real time, witnessed by dozens, recorded by more. Victor was gambling everything on his certainty that expertise requires pedigree, that class determines capability. But when you fail, Victor said, lowering his voice to a knife's edge, to that register that cuts deepest, you resign immediately. Tonight, you walk out of here, collect your final paycheck, and you publicly admit, on camera, for all these phones recording, for everyone watching online, that you were presumptuous enough to think a waitress with no formal credentials belonged in a conversation about fine wine. He smiled. That expertise requires education. That some knowledge isn't accessible to just anyone who wants it. That there are reasons why some people serve and others are served. The stakes crystallized in the air like frost forming on glass. This restaurant represented 3 generations of Carrington legacy. Victor's grandfather had opened it in 1952, right after returning from the war, with savings and ambition. His father had earned the first Michelin star in 1987. The second in 1993. Victor had added the third in 2019, the crowning achievement that put Carrington's among Seattle's elite establishments. The wine cellar alone was valued at $2.3 million. Bottles collected over 7 decades, some irreplaceable, some impossible to find at any price. Vintages that predated Victor's birth. History in glass. Victor was gambling his entire inheritance on the absolute certainty that a waitress could not possess master-level expertise. That class matters. That wealth determines worth. That the world he inherited was the world that should exist. But Sarah heard something else in those stakes. She heard salvation. Sarah's mind raced like a Formula One car with failing brakes. Every thought crashed into the next. A pileup of consequences and possibilities. If I fail, I lose everything. Her only income source gone. $35,000 a year, barely enough to survive in Seattle, but better than zero. Her father's health insurance vanished. The company policy that covered his dialysis would disappear the moment she was fired. The medical bills stacked on her coffee table would become impossible mountains. The dialysis treatments would stop. The twice-weekly sessions that kept toxins from building in his blood, that kept his heart from stopping. Gone. Her father would have maybe 6 months before toxins shut down his heart. Maybe less. She'd watched him deteriorate over 5 years. Watched his skin turn gray. Watched him shrink inside his clothes. Watched him smile less, laugh rarely. Exist rather than live. Without dialysis, that deterioration would accelerate. Become avalanche instead of erosion. Her hands trembled at her sides. Sweat beaded at her hairline despite the restaurant's perfect climate control. Despite the expensive HVAC system that kept everything at exactly 68 degrees. She could feel 60 pairs of eyes dissecting her fear, cataloging every micro-expression of doubt, reading her terror like text. But if I succeed, the thought was almost too enormous to hold. Too big to fit inside her skull without breaking something. $3 million in assets. She could liquidate the restaurant, sell to one of the corporate chains, always circling Seattle's independent establishments. Pay for her father's transplant surgery. $400,000. The exact amount she needed. Still have enough left over to restart her life. To reclaim the identity she'd buried. To become Sarah Bennett, the sommelier, instead of Sarah Bennett, the invisible waitress. To finally breathe. Her breathing quickened. Shallow. Panicked. The kind of breathing that precedes passing out or breaking down. She forced herself to slow it. In through nose, out through mouth. The meditation techniques her mother had taught her before. No, don't think about that. Not now. Then her old professor's voice echoed across 5 years, clear as if she were standing right there. A true palate never forgets, Sarah. It's like perfect pitch. You either have it or you don't. And you have it. Professor Martinez had said that during Sarah's final blind tasting at the Culinary Institute, Sarah had identified 12 wines perfectly. Region vintage, dominant varietals, winemaking techniques, even the fucking cooperage for the barrels. 12 for 12. Perfect score. Her professor had tears in her eyes. You're the most naturally gifted student I've taught in 30 years, she'd said. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise. This gift, it's rare. It's precious. Don't waste it. Sarah had let circumstances convince her otherwise. She'd buried that gift so deep she'd almost forgotten it existed, packed it away like winter clothes in summer, hoped it would be there if she ever needed it again. But gifts like that don't disappear. They wait. They sleep. They're ready when you need them most, like muscle memory, like riding a bicycle, like swimming. The body remembers even when the mind tries to forget. Sarah looked at Victor Carrington. This man who'd never known struggle, who'd inherited expertise instead of earning it, who'd spent 5 years looking through her like she was furniture, like she was wallpaper, like she was nothing. Her hands stopped trembling. I accept your terms, she said quietly, voice steady now, calm with the certainty of someone who's made an irreversible choice. Let's begin. Victor's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, then reconstructed itself like a mask sliding back into place. Hold on, sweetheart. I want to be fair here. I'll give you an out before we start. One qualification question. Answer it correctly, and we'll proceed with the challenge. Fail, and we'll spare you the public embarrassment. His voice dripped with false generosity, with the kind of condescension that pretends to be kindness. The crowd leaned forward, sensing another performance, another opportunity to watch someone squirm. Tell me, Victor said slowly, savoring each word like expensive wine, letting them sit on his tongue. What's the difference between right bank and left bank Bordeaux in terms of terroir composition and dominant grape varietals? Specifically, explain how soil structure affects aging potential and why certain chateaux command premium prices based on their geographic location. The room went silent. This wasn't basic knowledge. This wasn't something you learned from watching YouTube videos or reading Wikipedia. This was sommelier-level specificity, the kind of information you learned after years of formal education, after expensive courses and professional mentorship, not from serving wine at banquets. Victor's eyes gleamed with certainty. He'd given her an escape hatch that was actually a trapdoor. She'd failed this question, proof she was out of her depth, and they could all laugh and move on, and the hierarchy would remain intact. Someone in the crowd whispered loud enough to carry, "That's impossible. Even I don't know that, and I've been collecting Bordeaux for 20 years. Another voice, "That's master-level knowledge." Victor's smirk widened. "Checkmate," his expression said. Game over before it began. Sarah stood perfectly still. Let them watch. Let them doubt. Let them assume. She'd spent 5 years being underestimated. 5 years being invisible. 5 years letting people think she was less than she was. Tonight that ended. Then she spoke. "Right bank Bordeaux," Sarah began, her voice quiet but crystalline clear, carrying across the room with the confidence of someone who knows their subject cold. Particularly the Pomerol and Saint-Emilion appellations, feature clay and limestone soil compositions. The clay has high water retention properties, providing consistent hydration to the vines throughout the growing season, while the limestone, which sits beneath the clay in most premier properties, adds mineral complexity to the finished wine and helps with drainage during heavy rainfall. Victor's smirk froze. His eyes widened slightly. "These soils favor Merlot as the dominant grape varietal," Sarah continued, her confidence building with each word, each technical detail. "Merlot produces wines with earlier approachability. You can drink them younger, sometimes as early as 10 years post-vintage, and they develop a characteristically velvety tannin structure. Softer, more immediately pleasurable, less austere than left bank Cabernet Dominant blends." Several people in the crowd pulled out their phones, frantically Googling to verify. Their eyes widened as search results confirmed every word she was saying. "Left bank Bordeaux," Sarah said, her voice now carrying across the room like a lecturer addressing students, like someone who taught this material 100 times, "encompasses the Médoc, Pauillac, Margaux, and Graves appellations. These feature gravel-based soils, deposited by the Gironde estuary over millennia, with superior drainage characteristics. The gravel was brought down from the Pyrenees and Massif Central by glacial meltwater thousands of years ago." Victor's face had gone pale. His hand moved unconsciously to his collar, loosening it slightly. The gravel forces vine roots to dig deeper, sometimes 20 or 30 feet down, struggling for water. This stress, what the French call terroir in its truest sense, concentrates flavors and reduces yields. These soils favor Cabernet Sauvignon as the dominant varietal. Cabernet produces wines with firmer tannin structures and significantly longer aging potential. We're talking decades instead of years. Some first-growth Pauillacs can age for 50 or 60 years. She paused, letting the information settle, watching Victor's confidence crack. Then she delivered the killing blow. "The 1982 Chateau Petrus you're holding is right bank, Pomerol appellation, Merlot dominant, approximately 95% Merlot with 5% Cabernet Franc. That specific vintage weathered an unusual spring frost in April that reduced yields by approximately 30% across Pomerol. But at Petrus specifically, their 11.5-hectare vineyard lost almost 40% of potential production. The surviving grapes developed extraordinary concentration, higher Brix levels at harvest, thicker skins, more intense phenolic compounds." Someone in the crowd gasped audibly. "The result is distinctive minerality beneath the dark fruit profile, that wet stone quality that's signature to Pomerol's clay soils," Sarah continued, combined with Petrus's signature velvet texture from their incredibly old vines and meticulous winemaking. The 1982 vintage specifically is considered one of the greatest vintages of the 20th century. Robert Parker gave it a perfect 100-point score, and it's drinking at its absolute peak right now. 5 years from now, it starts declining. Tonight, it's perfect. The room erupted, not with applause, with shocked gasps and frantic whispers that built into a roar of disbelief. How does she know that? Someone said loudly. That's master sommelier level analysis. Another voice added. No, that's beyond master som. That's like court of master sommelier's advanced level. Who is she? How long has she been working here? 5 years, someone answered. I've been coming here for 5 years. She served me wine dozens of times. I never even asked her name. Victor's jaw clenched so hard a muscle twitched in his cheek. His smirk had completely shattered, lying in pieces at his feet like broken glass. Lucky guess, he managed, voice strained, desperate. Anyone can memorize Wikipedia entries. Anyone can. That wasn't on Wikipedia. Michaelchen, Victor's own sommelier, interrupted quietly. The information about Petrus's specific yield loss in 1982? That's from Christian Muweix's personal notes, from the Chateau's internal records. You'd only know that from being seriously involved in wine scholarship. Victor's hands betrayed him. They shook as he reached for his notepad, as he tried to regain control of a situation that was spiraling away from him like water through fingers. Fine, Victor said, forcing authority back into his voice. Let's proceed with the actual test. Words are cheap. Let's see if your palate matches your memory. Let's see if you can actually identify these wines blind. But here's what Victor doesn't understand yet. Sarah isn't remembering facts. She's remembering who she used to be. And that person is about to destroy him. Victor moved with exaggerated precision, determined to regain control through ritual, through the familiar motions that had always made him feel powerful. He personally uncorked the Petrus, the soft pop echoing in the silent room like a gunshot, like a starting pistol. His hands were steadier now, anchored by muscle memory, by thousands of bottles opened over the years. He decanted the legendary wine into the first crystal stem, tilting it carefully at exactly 45 degrees to avoid disturbing any sediment that might have formed during 4 decades in the bottle. The wine caught candlelight as it poured, transforming into liquid rubies, deep burgundy at the core with amber edges that spoke of age, of evolution, of time transforming grapes into something transcendent. The aromatics released immediately, filling the space around the table with dark fruit and forest floor and something indefinably ancient, something that smelled like history. Several people leaned forward unconsciously, drawn by the scent, by the olfactory promise of excellence. Into the second glass went the $800 mid-tier Bordeaux, still impressive, a 2015 Margaux from Chateau Palmer, reputable third-growth estate, young, tight, structured, the kind of wine that needed another decade in the bottle but would impress amateurs right now, because youth often reads as intensity as quality when you don't know better. The third glass received the $200 Napa Cabernet. Victor had opened it an hour earlier, letting it breathe in a decanter, giving it every possible advantage. It was fruit-forward accessible, the kind of wine that scored well in blind tastings because it was immediately pleasant without requiring contemplation or context. He arranged the 3 glasses on a white tablecloth in randomized order, marking their positions on a private notepad he tucked into his jacket pocket. His sommelier colleague, Michaelchen, certified master sommelier, wearing his pin proudly on his lapel, stepped forward to confirm the setup's integrity. All 3 wines properly presented, Michael announced to the crowd, his voice carrying official weight. No visual markers to distinguish them. The glasses are identical. The pours are equal. This is a fair test by any professional standard. But Michael's eyes lingered on Sarah with something that looked like recognition, like memory trying to surface. Something Victor didn't notice, because Victor never noticed anything that didn't confirm his worldview. The crowd pressed closer, forming a tight semicircle around the table. Bodies leaning in, phones raised. Someone had started a Facebook live stream. Jenny Martinez, food blogger with 50,000 followers. The view count climbed, 2,000, 3,500, 5,000 people watching remotely. The number growing exponentially as shares spread across Seattle's food community. Comments flooded in. Seattle restaurant drama. This is insane. That waitress is about to get destroyed. Actually, she just dropped serious wine knowledge, though. Victor Carrington is such an asshole. I'm here for the class warfare. The stakes had gone viral. This wasn't just Victor's reputation anymore. This was Seattle watching. The Pacific Northwest food community watching. Food, Twitter descending. Soon, the entire country would be watching a waitress challenge a millionaire restaurant owner to a blind tasting. The story had everything. Class conflict, hidden expertise, impossible stakes, potential humiliation. It was catnip for the algorithm. Victor produced a black silk blindfold from his pocket, the professional kind used in Court of Master Sommelier's examinations, the kind with padded edges that blocked all light. He'd purchased it years ago for a wine party that never happened, back when he'd imagined hosting sophisticated gatherings where he'd demonstrate his expertise. Now it would serve a different purpose. Turn around, he instructed Sarah, voice tight with tension. She complied, moving with calm that seemed impossible given the circumstances. Her hands were steady now, her breathing even. Whatever panic she'd felt earlier had been locked away, replaced by professional focus. Victor tied the blindfold himself, pulling it snug, ensuring no light leaked through the silk. His fingers brushed her hair, dark brown, pulled back in a practical ponytail. She smelled like industrial hand soap and something underneath lavender, maybe from cheap shampoo. Something human that contradicted the uniform, that reminded him briefly that she was a person and not just a role. He pushed the thought away. Can you see anything? Victor asked. Nothing, Sarah confirmed. Her voice was steady now, eerily calm, the kind of calm that comes from being pushed so far past fear that you reach something else entirely. Good. No cheating. Your entire future depends on what happens in the next 5 minutes. Sarah's world goes dark, but darkness is where her buried expertise lives. In this black void, she doesn't need eyes. Her other senses sharpened to supernatural precision, smell amplifying, taste receptors sensitizing, memory networks activating in her brain like city lights powering on after blackout. This is the environment where wine speaks its truest language, in scent molecules and tannin structures, in acidity levels and finish lengths, in the conversation between liquid and palate that happens beyond sight. This is where pretense falls away and only truth remains. Her heart pounded so violently she could feel it in her throat, her temples, her fingertips. 5 years since she'd done a professional blind tasting. 5 years since she trusted this part of herself. 5 years of deliberately forgetting, of survival erasing sophistication, of pretending she was less than she was just to keep a roof overhead and insurance active. What if it's gone? The thought struck like lightning. What if poverty really did dull the gift? What if 5 years of serving instead of studying destroyed what I spent years building? She thought of her father in that dialysis chair. Gray skin stretched over bones. Weak smile that tried to hide exhaustion. Machines filtering his blood because his kidneys had surrendered, because his body had given up the fight. The medical bills stacked like accusations. The impossible choice she'd made at 23. The identity she'd traded for his survival. This isn't just about wine. This is about proving that the person they dismissed actually possessed the expertise they worshipped. This is about showing that circumstances don't define capability. They just hide it. This is about reclaiming the self she'd buried alive. Sarah exhaled slowly, centered herself, let the noise of the room fade to background hum, focused inward toward the part of herself she'd locked away 5 years ago. Professor Martinez was right. True palates, don't forget, the gift is still there. It has to be. I'm ready, she said. Victor placed the first glass in Sarah's hand, cool crystal against her palm. She registered the weight, around 200 grams, with wine. The subtle warmth from the liquid inside. The way condensation hadn't formed yet, telling her this wine was at room temperature, not chilled. The room held its breath. 60 people in absolute silence. 8,000 watching online. Comments paused, everyone waiting. The only sound was Sarah's gentle swirl. Wine coating the glass side, creating legs, releasing aromatic compounds into the bowl of the glass. She lifted it to her nose. The first inhale hit her like a freight train made of memory. Her face transformed. The nervous waitress dissolved like sugar in hot water. The professional emerged, focused, analytical, certain. Her brain lit up like a power grid surging to life after years of darkness. Neural pathways she'd thought were dead sparking back to brilliant life. Black cherry, tobacco leaf, subtle earthiness underneath. But something was off. The finish was too short. The complexity missing that transcendent extra dimension that separates good wine from legendary wine. This was pleasant, but not profound. Enjoyable, but not extraordinary. She set it down without even tasting. Not the Petrus, she said simply. The room erupted in whispers. She eliminated it from smell alone. Is that even possible? Who is she? Victor's face tightened. His jaw clenched. A vein appeared at his temple. His certainty was cracking like ice under spring sun. 2 glasses remained. One was a $15,000 legend. The other was an $800 trap designed specifically to confuse, specifically chosen to make an amateur second-guess themselves. And Sarah Bennett's buried expertise wasn't just waking up. It was ready for war. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had to hide who you really are, just survive? And subscribe so you don't miss what happens when Sarah tastes the second glass, because what she's about to reveal will change everything. Victor's hand trembled as he lifted the second glass. Just slightly, a micro tremor that betrayed the certainty draining from his body like wine from a broken bottle, like confidence leaking through cracks in his worldview. He placed it in Sarah's waiting palm, crystal meeting skin with the gentlest clink. The room leaned forward collectively, 60 bodies moving as one organism hungry for drama, for resolution, for someone to win and someone to lose. Sarah repeated her ritual. Swirl. The wine climbed the glass walls, creating legs that spoke of alcohol content and glycerin levels. Thick legs meant higher alcohol, meant riper fruit, meant new world rather than old world winemaking philosophy. Inhale. Her nostrils flared slightly, drawing in aromatic compounds. Her olfactory receptors firing, sending signals to her brain that decoded information invisible to everyone watching. Pause. Her brain processed, compared, cataloged. Then she did something that made Victor's stomach drop. She took a sip, not a large one, professional, precise, just enough to coat her entire palate, front of tongue to back of throat, hitting every taste receptor. She held it there, mouth slightly open, drawing air across the liquid like professional tasters do, aerating it internally, letting the alcohol vaporize and carry aromatic compounds up through her retronasal passage to her olfactory receptors, accessing smell through taste. This was professional technique, unconscious, automatic, the muscle memory of someone who'd done this 10,000 times, who'd trained so intensely that the process became as natural as breathing. The room watched her face like ancient priests reading oracle bones, like fortune tellers reading tea leaves, searching for clues in every micro-expression. Sarah's eyebrows drew together slightly. Her lips pursed, then relaxed. Something clicked behind her blindfolded eyes. Recognition, confirmation, certainty. This wine speaks to her in a language she hasn't used in years but never forgot. The narration would emphasize. It's like riding a bicycle, like swimming, like any skill carved so deeply into neural pathways that time cannot erase it. Her palate remembers. Her brain remembers. Her entire sensory system lights up with recognition, with resurrection, with the joy of using a gift that's been locked away too long. She swirled the wine in her mouth one more time, coating every surface, then swallowed. Waited for the finish. Counted the seconds the flavor lingered. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 seconds. Maybe 6. Respectable, but not transcendent. Good but not great. Pleasant, but not profound. Her face transformed from concentration to certainty, from question to answer, from doubt to absolute conviction. Sarah's voice emerged stronger now, steady, confident. The nervous waitress was gone, erased like chalk from a board. The sommelier had taken her place, the professional Sarah, the expert Sarah, the Sarah who'd scored 99th percentile and made professors weep with pride. Cabernet Sauvignon dominant blend, she began, her tone carrying the authority of expertise that cannot be faked, that can only be earned through years of dedicated study. New world characteristics. American, specifically West Coast. The fruit profile is too ripe for Bordeaux. The sun is too present in this wine. Napa Valley most likely, possibly Sonoma, but the oak treatment suggests Napa. Victor's face began to drain of color. His hand moved unconsciously toward the notepad in his jacket pocket, toward the evidence that would confirm or deny her analysis. Riper fruit, Sarah continued, her analytical mind dissecting the wine like a surgeon, like someone performing an autopsy on liquid. Blackcurrant, blackberry, slight jammy quality that speaks to harvest at higher Brix levels. Probably 25 or 26 Brix at harvest. Higher alcohol content. I'm estimating 14.5%, maybe 15%. You can taste it in the heat, in the slight burn at the back of the throat. She paused, organizing her thoughts, presenting her case. Noticeable oak influence, vanilla, coconut notes from American oak barrels, probably 18 to 24 months of aging. The coconut specifically tells me American oak rather than French. French oak gives you more subtle spice notes, clove, cinnamon. This is more aggressive, more obvious. Several people in the crowd pulled out their phones, frantically Googling her terminology, verifying her analysis. Their eyes widened as search results confirmed every technical detail she was describing. This wasn't someone guessing. This was someone who knew. Well-made wine. Don't misunderstand me. Someone put care into this. The winemaking is competent, maybe even skillful, but it lacks the complexity and terroir specificity of Old World Bordeaux. There's no sense of place here, no minerality, no subtle earthiness that tells you exactly which plot of land these grapes came from, which hillside, which aspect, which microclimate. Her voice remained professional, analytical, but underneath ran a current of something else, of expertise finally allowed to speak, of knowledge finally permitted expression. This is fruit-forward, accessible, designed to be enjoyed young. It'll drink well now and for maybe another 5 years. But it doesn't have the structure for long-term aging. The tannins are soft, the acidity moderate. This is a wine made to please immediately rather than evolve over decades. Her voice dropped slightly, delivering the identification with surgical precision. This is the Napa Cabernet, your $200 bottle, dressed up with an hour of decanting to give it every possible advantage. The room erupted in whispers that built to a roar. How did you, Victor stammered, his hand now fully clutching the notepad like a lifeline. He pulled it out with shaking fingers, checked his notations with eyes that didn't want to believe what they were seeing. Position 2. Napa Cabernet. Cake bread sellers. $200. She was correct. The sophisticated audience members, the wine collectors who spent thousands annually, the restaurant owners who curated lists, the food critics who reviewed establishments, leaned forward with new intensity. This wasn't luck. This wasn't memorized facts regurgitated. This was genuine, expert-level blind tasting analysis, the kind that took years of dedicated study to develop, thousands of wines tasted, countless hours of training. She's reading it like a professional sommelier, someone whispered loud enough to carry. Who is she? Another voice asked. How long has she been working here? 5 years, someone answered, shame creeping into their voice. I've seen her serving at every event. I've probably been served by her dozens of times. I never even looked at her face. I never asked her name. The revelation hung in the air like smoke, like guilt made visible. How many times had these wealthy patrons been served by genius and never noticed? How many conversations had happened around her, treating her like furniture, like decoration, while she possessed expertise that surpassed most of theirs? How many times had they confirmed through their blindness exactly what Sarah had been forced to become, invisible? Victor's worldview began to crack like ice under pressure, like glass under stress. 5 years. 5 years this woman had served his tables, refilled his guests' water, cleaned up after his theatrical wine presentations. 5 years she'd watched him hold court, performing expertise for an audience, peacocking his knowledge, never knowing that she understood wine at a level he would never reach, could never reach, because his expertise was inherited while hers was earned. 5 years he never saw her, and now, blindfolded, she was demonstrating master-level expertise in front of the very people whose respect he craved, whose validation he needed like oxygen, whose admiration he'd built his entire identity around. The foundation was crumbling. His certainty was shattering, and one glass remained. While the room processed Sarah's identification, the digital world exploded into chaos. The live stream viewership hit 15,000, then 18,000, then 22,000, then 30,000. The numbers climbed with viral momentum, with exponential velocity, each share spreading to new networks, new communities, new audiences. Comments flooded the feed faster than anyone could read them. This is insane. Where did she learn this? That's professional-level analysis. I'm a sommelier, and even I'm impressed. She destroyed him. Plot twist of the century. Class warfare in real time. Drag him. Victor Carrington is finished. Hashtags emerged organically, spreading across social media like wildfire, like contagion. Hashtag Waitress versus owner. Hashtag Seattle Wine Challenge. Hashtag Hidden Genius. Hashtag Sarah Bennett. Hashtag Eat the Rich. Local food reporters in the crowd abandoned their dinners entirely, fingers flying across phone screens, texting editors with shaking hands. Breaking. Carrington's waitress demonstrates master-level wine expertise in public challenge. Story developing. Viral moment happening now at Carrington's. Need photographer immediately. This is front page tomorrow. Victor Carrington getting destroyed by his own waitress in blind tasting. Seattle Times food critic Rebecca Chin set down her wine glass with deliberate care, crystal meeting tablecloth with a soft clink. Her eyes narrowed in recognition, studying Sarah's profile, the precise vocabulary, the analytical approach, the clinical dissection of wine characteristics. She knew that style. She'd seen it before. She'd trained it before, years ago, in a young woman who'd been the most talented intern she'd ever mentored. A woman who'd scored 99th percentile on professional exams and then vanished from the industry without explanation, without goodbye, like she'd been erased from existence. Rebecca's mind raced backward through time, connecting dots that should have been obvious. Sarah Bennett. The name clicked into place like a key, finding its lock, like a puzzle piece, sliding home. That's Sarah Bennett, the prodigy who disappeared, the genius who vanished, the talent that the industry mourned and then forgot, because the industry always forgets, always moves on, always finds the next young star to celebrate. Rebecca's hand moved to her phone, pulling up old files, digging through archived emails, confirming suspicions. Her heart began to race. This wasn't just a viral moment. This was a resurrection story. This was injustice being corrected in real time. This was someone who'd been buried alive, clawing their way back to the surface. And one glass remained. One glass stood alone on the white tablecloth. The $15,000 1982 Chateau Petrus. Liquid history. 43 years of evolution contained in 750 milliliters of glass. Time transformed into taste. Money transformed into memory. The room understood what this moment meant. Everyone physically present and watching online understood the stakes had crystallized into this single glass of wine. Sarah had correctly identified two wines using professional-grade analysis that couldn't be faked, couldn't be mimicked, couldn't be performed by someone without years of intensive training. The first from aroma alone. The second with clinical precision that made professionals in the audience nod with recognition. If she identified the Petrus, if she nailed the legendary wine, the $15,000 bottle, the holy grail of this challenge, she won everything. Not just the restaurant, not just $3.2 million in assets, public vindication, financial salvation, the resurrection of her buried identity, proof that expertise doesn't die just because circumstances force you to hide it, proof that class doesn't determine capability, proof that the invisible people serving you might be the masters you never recognized. Victor's hands shook visibly as he lifted the third glass. Not subtly anymore, not a micro-tremor he could hide. This was full-body trembling, the physical manifestation of his worldview collapsing in real time. He wanted her to fail, needed her to fail with every fiber of his entitled existence. His entire worldview depended on the certainty that class determines capability, that expensive education creates expertise, that birthright matters more than talent, that he deserved what he had and she deserved what she didn't. If Sarah succeeded, everything he believed about the world and about himself would shatter. Every assumption that let him sleep at night would prove false. Every justification for the hierarchy would crumble. He placed the glass in her palm like a man handing over a loaded weapon, like someone arming their own executioner. Sarah's fingers closed around the stem. Before she even lifted it, before she brought it to her nose, she knew. The weight was different, heavier. These were vintage Riedel stems, the ones Victor reserved exclusively for his most expensive pours, the ones kept in a locked cabinet, the ones that cost $300 each. A tell he didn't realize he'd given, his need for theater betraying him at the crucial moment, his vanity becoming his weakness. She lifted the glass to her nose. Time seemed to stop. The earth paused in its rotation. The universe held its breath. Her eyes closed behind the blindfold, her entire being focused into this single moment of olfactory analysis, this instant where everything, past, present, future, concentrated into scent molecules and memory. This wasn't just wine. This was time in a bottle. This was 1982, a legendary vintage, considered one of the greatest of the 20th century. After 43 years of patient evolution in dark cellars. This was history. This was art. This was why wine exists. The aroma hit her like a symphony reaching its crescendo. Dark cherry, black truffle, worn leather like her father's favorite jacket, rose petals dried between book pages, wet earth after rain, that petrichor smell that feels like home, a whisper of tobacco leaf, complexity layered on complexity layered on complexity. each inhalation revealing new dimensions, new facets, new secrets. This was why wine existed. This was why she'd fallen in love with it as a young student, why she'd chosen this path, why she believed this could be her life. This was why she'd studied for years, training her palate to distinguish subtleties that most people would never perceive, would never even know existed. She took a sip. The wine coated her palate like liquid velvet. The tannins, once firm and structured, probably aggressive in youth, had softened over 4 decades to a texture like silk, like cashmere, like something impossibly smooth. But they retained their architectural integrity, giving the wine shape and definition and structure. The acidity was perfectly balanced, bright enough to prevent heaviness but not sharp, not aggressive, just present enough to make your mouth water, to make you want another sip. The finish was endless, flavor evolving second by second, revealing new facets like turning a diamond in light. 5 seconds, 10, 15, 20, still present, still unfolding, still speaking. Tertiary characteristics dominated: leather, tobacco, forest floor, mushroom, truffle, earth. But beneath them, miraculously, the fruit remained pure, not fresh, not young, but present, integrated, essential. The dark cherry was still there, transformed by time, but not erased. This was a perfect bottle. Peak maturity. Drinking in its optimal window. 5 years from now, it would start declining. 10 years ago, it hadn't fully opened. But tonight, right now, this wine was perfect. This is what all those years of study were for. Sarah held the wine in her mouth for 10 seconds. 15. Committing every detail to memory. Burning this moment into her brain, knowing she might never taste something this profound again. Then swallowed. The finish lasted 30 seconds. 40. Still present after a minute. Still lingering. Still speaking in that language only wine can speak. She set the glass down with ceremonial care, like placing something sacred on an altar, like handling history. Then she reached up and removed the blindfold herself, taking control, claiming agency. Sarah's eyes opened, adjusting to candlelight after the darkness, pupils contracting, vision focusing. She looked directly at Victor Carrington with eyes that no longer apologized for existing, eyes that no longer begged permission to be seen, eyes that no longer accepted invisibility. Her voice emerged clear, steady, authoritative. 1982 Chateau Petrus, Right Bank Bordeaux, Pomerol appellation, Merlot dominant blend, approximately 95% Merlot with 5% Cabernet Franc. From vines averaging 40 years old at the time of harvest, planted in clay limestone soil on the Pomerol Plateau. Victor's notepad slipped from his fingers, hit the floor. No one moved to pick it up. The sound echoed like a gavel. This specific vintage weathered an unusual spring frost in April 1982 that reduced yields by approximately 30% across Pomerol. Sarah continued, her expertise flowing like the wine itself, like something that had been dammed and was finally released. The surviving grapes developed extraordinary concentration. Sugar levels at harvest were exceptionally high for the region. The result is distinctive minerality beneath the dark fruit profile, that whetstone quality that's signature to Pomerol's clay soils, that terroir fingerprint that's unmistakable once you know it. She gestured to the glass like a professor teaching, like someone who'd explained this 100 times. The tannins have softened considerably over 43 years, but retain structural integrity. You can still feel the architecture of the wine, the skeleton that gives it shape. It's reached its optimal drinking window, showing fully developed tertiary characteristics: leather, tobacco, forest floor, truffle, mushroom. But remarkably, the fruit purity remains. The dark cherry hasn't disappeared. It's integrated, transformed, but still present. Her voice dropped, delivering the final assessment with absolute certainty. This is considered one of the greatest vintages of the 20th century. Robert Parker gave it a perfect 100-point score. Jancis Robinson calls it liquid perfection. This bottle specifically is drinking at absolute peak maturity. Open it 5 years from now, and you waited too long. Drink it 10 years ago, and it hadn't yet revealed itself fully. Right now, tonight, this wine is perfect. She locked eyes with Victor. This is the Petrus. Silence. Pure, absolute, crystalline silence. 60 people holding their breath. 35,000 watching online. Comments frozen in disbelief. The live stream chat had stopped scrolling. Everyone waited. Then Rebecca Chin stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, breaking the spell. That, she said, her voice ringing with authority. With 30 years of food journalism backing every word, is master sommelier-level analysis. That is court of master sommeliers, examination quality, blind tasting. That is expertise that cannot be faked, cannot be performed, cannot be anything other than genuine. She turned to face Sarah directly. Who are you? The room didn't applaud. It erupted, not with polite appreciation, with chaos, pure, uncontrolled pandemonium. The kind of reaction that happens when certainty shatters, when the impossible becomes real, when the world tilts on its axis, and everyone feels it simultaneously. Guests leap to their feet, talking over each other, voices climbing in volume and excitement and disbelief. Phones appeared from everywhere, pockets, purses, jacket, recording from every angle, live streaming, texting, posting to social media with shaking hands that could barely hold devices steady. The online viewership exploded. 25,000, 35,000, 50,000, 75,000. The numbers climbed with exponential velocity, each share spreading to new networks. The algorithm recognizing viral potential and pushing it to more feeds, more timelines, more screens. Twitter/X lit up with Seattle trends. Hashtag Seattle Waitress, 42.3K tweets. Hashtag Victor Carrington, 38.1K tweets. Hashtag Wine Challenge, 91.7K tweets. Hashtag Sarah Bennett, climbing rapidly. Hashtag Class Warfare, trending nationally. Instagram stories, flooded timelines. TikTok clips went viral within minutes. The algorithm identifying class struggle content and serving it to millions, each one accumulating hundreds of comments within minutes. News organizations noticed. CNN's social media team flagged it. Fox News picked it up. NBC Seattle dispatched a crew. Victor Carrington stood frozen at the center of the chaos, notepad on the floor at his feet, confirming every identification. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air, like someone whose brain couldn't process the magnitude of what had just occurred. No sound emerged. His throat worked but produced nothing. His certainty. That bedrock assumption that class determines capability, that poverty means ignorance, that servers are inherently less than those they serve, shattered like crystal dropped on marble, like glass under a hammer, like ice under a sledgehammer. Everything he'd built his identity on proved false in 15 minutes. Someone shouted above the noise. The contract, is it legally binding? A man in an expensive suit, Marcus Walsh, corporate lawyer, Sherman and Sterling, raised his voice. Verbal contract. 60 witnesses. Recorded on multiple devices. If he reneges, he's professionally destroyed in this city. Legally, she has grounds to force the transfer. This would be an easy case to win. Another voice. That's $3 million in assets. He gambled his inheritance on arrogance. She destroyed him. Did you see his face? I can't believe this is real. This is the best thing I've ever seen. Victor's PR was collapsing in real time. The video would be everywhere by morning. National news by afternoon. International by evening. His restaurant, his family legacy, 3 generations of Carrington work, would forever be remembered as the place where inherited privilege got humiliated by hidden expertise, where arrogance met its match, where class assumptions shattered against reality. But forget Victor for a moment. Watch Sarah. Her posture changed, physically transformed before their eyes like time-lapse photography of a flower blooming. She stood taller, shoulders rolling back, spine straightening, head lifting. The apologetic hunch of the invisible service worker. That protective posture developed over 5 years of making herself small, of occupying as little space as possible, melted away like snow in sunlight. This was who she'd been before circumstance forced her to shrink, before survival demanded invisibility, before love required sacrifice. This was Sarah Bennett, the sommelier, Sarah Bennett, the expert, Sarah Bennett, the prodigy who'd made professors weep. She turned to face Victor directly, not with triumph, not with cruelty, not with the gloating satisfaction that might be expected, might be justified, with something far more devastating, pity. "I've worked for you for 5 years, Mr. Carrington," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the chaos with quiet authority. 5 years of double shifts, 5 years of swallowing disrespect from you and your guests, 5 years of pretending I didn't notice things, of playing ignorant, of making myself small so you could feel big. The room began to quiet, sensing something important, sensing a moment that mattered. "I pretended I didn't notice when you served oxidized Chardonnay at the Emerson wedding, wine that had turned to vinegar, but you charged them $800 anyway. When you passed off a 2018 Brunello as a 2015 to the Anderson anniversary party because you knew they wouldn't taste the difference, wouldn't know better. When you charged $300 for champagne that was actually $80 Prosecco, counting on your guests' ignorance." Victor's face went from pale to green, from shock to nausea. "I stayed silent because I needed this job. I needed the health insurance that kept my father alive. I needed the steady paycheck that covered his medications, his dialysis, his survival. But I was never the person you saw when you looked at me." Her voice strengthened, filling the entire room, carrying to every corner. "I was never just a waitress." The crowd absorbed this revelation in stunned silence. Then the murmurs started, sympathetic, angry on her behalf, ashamed of their own blindness. She had a reason. She was surviving. And he treated her like furniture. For 5 years. We all did. I never even asked her name. This wasn't just entertainment anymore. This was a morality play about class, dignity, and invisible expertise, about how society treats people based on their uniforms rather than their capabilities, about who gets to be seen and who doesn't, about the genius that exists in overlooked people, buried by circumstance, hidden by necessity. Sarah had become something larger than herself. She'd become a symbol, a representation, evidence that every assumption about class and capability might be wrong. Rebecca Chin pushed through the crowd with the determination of someone who'd spent 30 years in journalism, who'd broken stories and exposed corruption and refused to be ignored. She moved like a bullet train, guests parting before her instinctively, recognizing authority when they saw it. Sarah Bennett. The name landed like a gavel, like a verdict. Sarah turned, seeing Rebecca for the first time in 8 years. Recognition flooded her face. Surprise, fear, hope, shame, all mixing together in a single expression. "Miss Chin, I knew I recognized that analytical style," Rebecca said, loud enough for everyone to hear, loud enough for the live stream microphones to capture. "You were my intern 8 years ago at Canlis. You scored 99th percentile on the certified sommelier exam. You were on track to become the youngest master sommelier in Pacific Northwest history. Restaurants were fighting over you. Distributors requested you by name. You were legendary." She turned to address Victor and the entire crowd, her voice carrying the weight of authority, of truth, of evidence. "This woman was a prodigy in our industry, Other sommeliers twice her age were jealous of her palate. I've worked in food journalism for 30 years, and I've never encountered a natural talent like hers. She could identify obscure Italian varietals from a single sip. She could distinguish between Burgundy villages separated by 100 yards. She was the kind of talent that comes once in a generation. Rebecca's voice cracked slightly. Then she disappeared. No explanation. No goodbye. Just gone. Vanished from the industry like she'd never existed. We all wondered what happened to the most talented palate I'd encountered in 30 years of food journalism. We mourned the loss. Then we moved on because the industry always moves on. She looked at Sarah with eyes that understood loss, that understood sacrifice. Sarah's own eyes glistened, but didn't spill. She'd cried enough over the past 5 years. She'd shed enough tears to fill wine bottles. Tonight wasn't about tears. Tonight was about resurrection. My mother died, Sarah said simply, voice steady despite the emotion underneath. Stroke. Massive. Catastrophic. Then my father's kidneys failed. Advanced failure. Requiring immediate dialysis. The medical bills. Her voice caught. I had to choose between my dream and his life. Between who I wanted to be and who he needed me to be. So I chose his life. I chose survival over ambition. I chose love over career. She gestured around Carrington's. I took the first job that offered health insurance and steady pay. That job was here, serving wine instead of mastering it, watching other people enjoy what I'd studied for years, pretending I knew nothing so I could keep the job that kept my father alive, dying slowly inside while performing ignorance. The crowd's energy shifted. This wasn't just drama anymore. This wasn't just entertainment. This was tragedy. This was sacrifice. This was the American working class experience crystallized into one woman's story. This was what happens when healthcare is tied to employment, when expertise doesn't matter if you can't afford to use it, when survival forces you to bury who you are. Rebecca pulled out her phone, held up her Seattle Times press credentials for everyone to see. I've been documenting Victor Carrington's labor practices for 6 months, she announced, her journalist voice carrying to every corner. Wage theft, verbal abuse, workplace harassment, health code violations, sexual harassment, complaints swept under the rug, staff working off the clock because they're afraid to say no. This public humiliation tonight is mild compared to what his staff endures daily. I have testimonies from 12 current and former employees. Victor's face went from green to white, from nausea to terror. And now, Rebecca continued, her journalist instinct sensing blood in the water, sensing the story of her career unfolding in real time. We've all witnessed him gamble his family's 3-generation legacy on the assumption that a working-class woman couldn't possibly possess elite knowledge. That expertise requires wealth. That class determines capability. That poverty means ignorance. That the people who serve him are inherently lesser. She turned to Victor directly, cameras capturing every word. Mr. Carrington, you made a public wager in front of 60 witnesses, and she checked her phone. Now 87,000 people watching online. You have 2 choices. Honor your contract and transfer ownership, or refuse and face the legal and professional consequences. But know this. My article goes live tomorrow morning regardless of your choice. The only question is whether you're remembered as arrogant or arrogant and a liar. Your reputation is already destroyed. The only thing you control now is whether you have any integrity left. The room held its breath. Phones captured every angle. The live stream viewership hit 100,000. Victor's face cycled through emotions like a slot machine. Shock, rage, denial, calculation, desperation, fear. Then something unexpected happened. His shoulders sagged. The fight drained out of him like wine from a broken bottle, like air from a punctured tire. He looked suddenly smaller, older, stripped of the confidence that wealth had always provided. The armor of privilege cracked and fell away, revealing the insecure man underneath. He looked at Sarah, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in 5 years. Saw her not as furniture, not as a role, not as a help, but as a person, as someone with history, with expertise, with dreams destroyed and dignity maintained despite everything. "How long?" he asked, voice hollow-broken. "How long have you known wine at this level?" Sarah met his gaze steadily, unflinching. "Since before you inherited this restaurant from your father, Mr. Carrington. Since before you added the 3rd Michelin star. Since you were still trying to prove you deserved what you were born into." The words landed like a physical blow, like a punch to the stomach. "I earned my expertise," Sarah continued quietly but with steel underneath. "You inherited yours. You inherited this restaurant, inherited your reputation, inherited respect you never had to work for. I built my knowledge from nothing, through years of study and natural talent, only to have circumstances bury it. And yet, buried, hidden, forced underground, it remained sharper than your displayed credentials ever were. Sharp intakes of breath around the room, that cut deep, that exposed the fundamental truth. Victor had never earned anything in his life. The restaurant, inherited. The reputation, inherited. The respect, borrowed from his family name, from his father's work, from his grandfather's vision. Sarah had built her expertise from nothing, through years of study and relentless practice, only to have the brutal mathematics of American healthcare and working-class survival bury it. And yet her buried knowledge surpassed his displayed credentials. Her hidden expertise exceeded his public performance. Her forced silence contained more truth than his theatrical certainty. Victor slumped into the nearest chair, collapsing more than sitting. His hands covered his face. $3 million, he whispered. A verbal contract witnessed by 60 people, and now over 100,000 online. My lawyers will tell me to fight it. They'll say verbal contracts are unreliable, that I was drunk, that she cheated somehow. He looked up, face aged a decade in an hour. But they're wrong, he said, voice breaking. She won. Fairly. Completely. And I. His voice failed. His reputation in Seattle's food community, a tight-knit world where everyone knew everyone, where reputation mattered more than money, was already destroyed. The video would follow him forever, algorithmically recommended to anyone who searched his name. Viral moments don't disappear. They become permanent. Fight this. And he becomes the villain who publicly humiliated and then cheated a working-class woman with hidden genius. A woman who'd sacrificed her dreams for her father's survival. A woman who'd endured his disrespect for 5 years because she had no choice. A woman who'd proven that everything he believed about class and capability was a lie designed to justify his unearned privilege. He would be destroyed. Professionally, socially, completely, unless, from the back of the room, a man stood slowly, unfolding from his chair with deliberate calm. He'd been silent all evening, observing with the calculated patience of someone who built empires by recognizing value others missed, by seeing potential in overlooked places. Marcus Holloway, tech billionaire, early Amazon investor, who turned $100,000 into $2 billion, known for philanthropy that actually changed lives rather than just buying naming rights on buildings, rather than tax deductions disguised as charity. He wore an understated suit that cost more than most cars but looked almost plain. Brunello Cucinelli, custom-tailored. The kind of wealth that doesn't need to scream. That was his signature. Real wealth doesn't perform. It simply exists. He walked through the crowd with quiet authority that made people move unconsciously, instinctively recognizing someone who mattered. His footsteps were the only sound in a room that held its breath. Miss Bennett, he said, voice calm but carrying effortlessly. I'm Marcus Holloway. Sarah recognized the name immediately. Everyone in Seattle did. Everyone in tech did. The man was worth billions and used it to actually change systems rather than just donate to pet projects. I've built my career investing in people society underestimates, Marcus continued, each word deliberate considered. People with talent buried by circumstance. People born on the wrong side of the opportunity divide. Your demonstration tonight wasn't just about wine identification. It was about hidden excellence surviving despite systemic barriers designed to keep people in their place. He reached into his jacket, withdrew a business card, handed it to Sarah with both hands, a gesture of respect that made several people gasp. Marcus Holloway didn't respect many people. This meant something. I'm opening a wine education foundation, he said. Scholarships for talented individuals who lack financial access to sommelier certification. People like you, gifted, brilliant, but trapped by the economics of expertise, by the cost of education, by the brutal choice between dreams and survival. I'd like you to direct it, build the program, create the curriculum, choose the scholars. The room leaned forward collectively, bodies moving as one. Starting salary $120,000 annually, Marcus said calmly, as if discussing weather. Full medical benefits for you and your father. Comprehensive coverage, no copays, no deductibles. Coverage that actually covers things. And a $400,000 signing bonus, designated specifically for his transplant surgery. Sarah's knees buckled. Someone, Rebecca, caught her elbow, steadied her. $400,000. The exact amount. The precise number. The barrier between her father living and dying, between survival and health, between existence and life. Her father's transplant, fully funded. Her expertise, finally valued at what it was worth. Her identity, finally recognized and compensated. Her sacrifice, finally acknowledged. Tears came now, couldn't stop them, didn't want to. These were tears that washed away 5 years of accumulated grief, of swallowed rage, of forced invisibility. These were tears of relief so profound they felt physical, like something breaking inside her chest and finally letting light in. Your father will never miss another dialysis session due to lack of funds, Marcus continued gently. He'll have the transplant within 3 months. I have connections at Seattle Presbyterian, and there's a matching donor available. You'll have time to be with him during recovery without worrying about rent, about bills, about survival. You'll have space to breathe, to rebuild, to become who you were meant to be. Victor stood slowly, like someone much older than his 52 years. The crowd tensed, expecting him to fight, to rage, to lawyer his way out, to perform wealth's usual escape from consequences. Instead, he approached Sarah, extended his hand. The gesture was so unexpected that several people gasped. I owe you an apology, he said, voice breaking. Years of certainty crumbling in real time. A public one that means something. I saw a uniform instead of a person. I assumed poverty meant ignorance because that assumption made me feel better about inheriting everything. I was wrong about you, about expertise, about what determines human worth. He looked around at the crowd, at the phones still recording, at the 100,000 people watching online. The restaurant is yours if you want it, he said. The contract stands. Legally, you want it. Ethically, you earned it. But I suspect Mr. Holloway's offer better honors your actual talent, better serves what you can become. Sarah looked at the man who'd dismissed her for 5 years, who'd made her small, who'd treated her like furniture. She could take his restaurant. Legally, she'd won it. She could destroy him completely, leave him with nothing. Let him experience what poverty felt like, what invisibility meant. Instead, she chose grace. Keep your restaurant, Mr. Carrington, she said, voice steady despite the tears still wet on her cheeks. I don't want something you built, something your grandfather built, something your father expanded. I want to build something new, something mine, something that creates opportunities for people like me, people whose excellence society refuses to see because we're wearing the wrong uniform, because we were born on the wrong side of the divide. She turned to Marcus, leaving Victor standing there with his extended hand, with his apology hanging in the air. I accept your offer, Mr. Holloway, on one condition. The foundation also provides emergency grants for people forced to choose between dreams and survival. Medical emergency funds, crisis intervention, so no one else has to bury who they are just to keep their family alive. So no other 23-year-old has to sign papers letting their mother die while watching their career turn to ash. Her voice strengthened with each word, with each demand. So no other talented person has to spend 5 years pretending to be less than they are. So expertise buried by circumstance can be resurrected. So hidden genius gets found. Marcus smiled, genuinely, the kind of smile that reaches eyes and means something. Done. We'll call it the Sarah Bennett Fellowship for Interrupted Dreams, and you'll have complete autonomy over who receives funding and why. No committees, no bureaucracy, just you, recognizing excellence in overlooked places. The room erupted in applause, real applause this time, not polite appreciation, genuine, thunderous, standing ovation applause that acknowledged something profound had just occurred, that justice, however rare, had manifested, that the impossible had become real. Victor stood apart from the celebration, isolated by his own assumptions, surrounded by people, but utterly alone. He'd gambled his certainty and lost, but in losing, perhaps he'd gained something more valuable, the beginning of awareness, the first crack in a lifetime of unexamined privilege. 6 months later, Sarah Bennett stands in a modern classroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Puget Sound, the water glittering in afternoon sun like scattered diamonds. 20 scholarship students, diverse backgrounds, unified by talent and previous lack of opportunity. Watch her lead a blind tasting demonstration with the focus of people who know they're receiving something precious. These are the Sarah Bennetts who almost weren't, the single mothers who couldn't afford sommelier courses, the immigrants whose credentials weren't recognized, the formerly incarcerated who couldn't get hired at fine dining establishments despite having palates that rivaled professionals, the disabled students who needed accommodations that expensive programs wouldn't provide, the indigenous scholars preserving traditional fermentation knowledge that Western wine culture ignored. Every one of them brilliant, every one of them overlooked, every one of them given a chance because Sarah remembered what invisibility felt like. In the back row sits her father, Robert Bennett, healthy, the gray pallor gone from his skin, replaced by pink that speaks of circulation restored, of kidneys functioning, of a body that's healing rather than failing. Post-transplant, thriving. He's gained back the 30 pounds he'd lost. His eyes are clear. His smile reaches all the way to those eyes. He's wearing a shirt Sarah bought him with her first paycheck from the foundation. Navy blue, his favorite color. It fits properly now that he's not swimming in fabric designed for a body that was wasting away. Sarah holds up a glass of wine, light refracting through it like liquid ruby. Dreams don't disappear when you bury them, she says to her students, her voice carrying the authority of someone who knows this truth in her bones, who's lived it, who's survived it. They just fall asleep, waiting for the moment you're strong enough to wake them, waiting for the moment circumstances shift, waiting for someone to see you. Her father wipes his eyes. He does this a lot now, cries easily, emotional in a way he wasn't before. Near death does that. Resurrection does that. Watching your daughter reclaim herself does that. Tonight, today, you learned that expertise doesn't require pedigree, Sarah continues. That talent exists everywhere. Even in people society trains us to overlook. Especially in people society trains us to overlook. The person serving your coffee might be a genius barista who understands extraction rates better than chemistry professors. The person cleaning your office might possess knowledge that surpasses yours. The person you don't see might be the master you never recognized. She sets down the glass, meets each student's eyes individually. You all have that opportunity now, she says. The opportunity to show what you know, to prove what you can do, to become who you were meant to be before circumstances interrupted. Don't waste it. Not because you owe me, you don't. Not because you owe society. It failed you. But because you owe yourself. You owe the version of you that survived. You owe the dreams that fell asleep. She pauses, lets the weight settle. And when you succeed, when you become master sommeliers and wine directors and educators and critics and writers and entrepreneurs, remember where you came from, Sarah says, voice thick with emotion. Remember who society said you couldn't be. Remember what they said talent looked like and how wrong they were. Then build opportunities for the next person they underestimate. Then see the invisible people. Then ask the waitress her name. The students applaud. Her father beams, pride radiating from him like heat from a fire. Marcus Holloway, observing from the doorway with a clipboard full of expansion plans, nods with satisfaction. This is what return on investment looks like when you invest in people instead of just profit. On the wall hangs a framed photo, not Sarah's Culinary Institute graduation. That picture still sits in her apartment, a memorial to a different life. This is new. Sarah in professional attire, accepting the James Beard Leadership Award for Innovation in Wine Education. Her father beside her, healthy, standing without assistance. Both of them smiling, so bright it hurts to look at, joy uncontained. Beside it, another frame. A check for $400,000 made out to Seattle Presbyterian Hospital. Payment in full for Robert Bennett's transplant surgery. Mark paid. She hasn't cashed it, it's already been processed. But she had them print a ceremonial copy, a reminder of what changed, of what became possible when hidden expertise finally got seen. Sarah Bennett, no longer invisible, no longer apologizing for existing, no longer making herself small, has finally come home to herself. But more than that, she's building homes for others. Creating spaces where buried dreams can wake up, where interrupted talent can resume, where the person serving your wine might be the master teaching the next generation. And society will finally see them. Victor Carrington still owns his restaurant, still serves expensive wine to wealthy patrons. But Rebecca Chen's article changed things. He attends harassment prevention training now, pays staff fairly, treats servers like people instead of furniture. He'll never be what he was. That certainty is gone forever, shattered on the floor of his dining room along with his notepad. Sometimes he watches Sarah's students give presentations at industry events. He sits in the back quietly and wonders how many other invisible people he never saw, how much genius he dismissed, how many Sarah Bennetts he walked past without seeing, how many masters he overlooked because they were wearing the wrong uniform. The wine industry is changing too, slowly, painfully, but changing. The Sarah Bennett Fellowship has funded 200 scholars in 6 months. Other organizations are copying the model. Restaurants are hiring from unconventional pipelines. The Court of Master Sommeliers has created needs-based scholarships. It's not enough. It's never enough. But it's something. It's a start. And Sarah Bennett, standing in front of 20 students who represent possible futures, holds up another glass. Now, she says, smiling that smile that finally reaches her eyes again, let's talk about how to identify Burgundy villages by soil composition. Close your eyes. Trust your palate. Remember, expertise lives in you, even when circumstances force you to hide it, even when the world refuses to see it. It's there, waiting, ready. The students close their eyes. Sarah begins to pour. and dreams that fell asleep begin, slowly, to wake. Smash that like button if this story resonated with you. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever had to choose between dreams and survival, let's get this video to people who need to hear that buried dreams can wake up. Subscribe and hit the notification bell, because next story will absolutely wreck you emotionally in the best way. Trust me, you do not want to miss that one. It's about hidden identity, sacrifice, and the moment truth explodes in the most unexpected way. Share this video if you believe expertise exists in overlooked people. If you think we need to see the invisible. If you're tired of class determining who gets opportunities. See you in the comments.